So what I'm going to be sharing with you today are my own home buying experience, as well as what I think are some of the most important considerations when you're thinking about buying or renting a home, and what are some of the things that you need to look at to decide whether you're ready to move into home ownership and start that journey, that part of your life. My name is Robyn Adamache, and I work at Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, that's CMHC, and I work in a department where we work with housing providers, both developers, nonprofits, other levels of the government, to develop affordable housing. We're really trying to increase the supply of rental housing, both on the market side and on the affordable side. I mostly grew up in smaller towns in BC. We lived in Cranbrook and Kamloops and Nelson and a bunch of places like that, and eventually ended up on the island for high school. And that was in Duncan, went to the illustrious Cow High, and then did my first couple of years at Malaspina College in Nanaimo. I was very happy in about 1998 to move over to the Lower Mainland, to the big city, and go to SFU. And I did a Bachelor of Business Administration there, as well as a master's degree in economic geography. I ended up having kind of a late start to my career because I was in university for about 10 years or so. And then following that, I went to Japan for 4 years to teach English. And that was, of course, a wonderful experience and very enlightening. So by the time I returned to Canada in about the year 2000, and I would have been in about my early 30s then, I really needed to establish myself in the Canadian job market and get a job, basically. And I knew by that point that it wasn't teaching English that I wanted to do. So in order to try and get established, I tried some entry-level jobs in several different types of industries, worked in accounting, even worked in a aerospace company out in Abbotsford for a while, which was very interesting. And eventually I got a really interesting job in data analysis with a small polling firm that did some really interesting work. And it was then that I heard about an opening at CMHC for a housing market analyst job. And while I didn't really have any direct experience in housing per se, I did have a lot of transferable skills in data analysis, in communicating the results of this analysis and things like that. So I was lucky enough to get the job with CMHC in 2003. And so I worked for the first few years learning about housing market analysis, and I actually had the opportunity to do a temporary assignment at our national office in Ottawa for a few months, which was very interesting. And then in 2007, I became the senior analyst and CMHC spokesperson on the Vancouver housing market. So I did that for about 10 years, and at that point I started sort of looking for some new challenges. And there was a temporary assignment that came up in our multi-unit insurance department. So I did underwriting for 6 months. So that was super interesting. Not something I'd necessarily want to do on a full-time basis forever, but it really gave me some good insights into how to finance rental apartment buildings and our insurance systems in general. So then in 2017, I actually ended up moving over permanently to the multi-unit insurance department and working as the client relations manager, working with lenders and borrowers to finance rental apartment deals. In that same year, in 2017, CMHC launched the National Housing Strategy, or NHS, and this really refocused CMHC on affordable housing. That has become our raison d'etre, our reason for being, and we have kind of an audacious goal that we've set, and that is by 2030, everybody in Canada will have a home that is affordable and that meets their needs. So in 2019, we had a bit of a restructuring at CMHC, and that was really to align our internal corporate structure with the goals of the National Housing Strategy. And so my job kind of shifted over to what was formerly affordable housing department. And I now work with housing proponents, assisting them with a full range of financing options through CMHC to develop affordable housing. So that would include things like our multi-unit mortgage loan insurance programs, and we also have several direct lending programs through the NHS to help people build and renovate rental buildings. So I found that this is very interesting and challenging work. We have some very complex and innovative rental projects in a very unique market environment in Metro Vancouver. So some of our colleagues back east say we have some of the most sort of complicated projects in the country. So that keeps me on my toes, and it's really given me a lot of new insights into the market, as well as the whole rental industry. Overall, I would say that I've been very lucky to work at CMHC for 18 years, and it's really provided me with lots of opportunity to grow, learn, develop new skills, do lots of things that I never thought I could do or would do. So it's been a really great learning experience, really supportive environment, and I'm lucky enough to work with great people both within CMHC and with the great proponents that we work with as well. As I mentioned earlier, I returned to Canada from Japan in my early 30s, and this was around the year 2000. Really needed to establish myself in the job market, and really wasn't in a position yet to be able to buy a home. And this kind of brings up a really important point that I think will come through in many of the chapters that we talk about today, is that home ownership is a great opportunity. I can't say enough good stuff about it. However, you really have to be in the right position in your life, particularly the right financial position, to be able to take on that kind of debt and manage it responsibly. So at that point, as I'd just come back to Canada, I was still pretty young. I didn't really have much yet in terms of stability in my life. So what I did was rented an apartment, and I ended up actually living there for about 7 years, and I had a really great experience renting. It enabled me to live close to work in a neighborhood that frankly I never could have afforded to buy in. So for about 6 or 7 years, I lived in South Granville, and so my commute to work was very short, and it enabled me to really focus on my career while living in a great neighborhood and taking advantage of all the things that were available around me. Another thing that it really enabled me to do, because I was still pretty young and didn't have a lot of stuff tying me down, it enabled me to go to Ottawa for a temporary assignment. And my landlord actually held my apartment for me for 6 months, and I think he cut my rent in half. So, so that was great. I could hold on to that, and then when I was ready to come back after my 6-month assignment, I could move right back into my apartment, and I was so glad to be back in Vancouver, frankly. For the next few years, I worked really hard on my career and saved my pennies. And then in 2010, I, thanks to a good friend of mine, met my husband. And in 2011, we bought a place together out in Coquitlam and got ourselves established there. And then in 2012, we got married. And so we stayed in Coquitlam for about 6 years. And at that point, this was pre-COVID, of course, I was commuting to work every day, and it just seemed like my commute was getting longer and longer with every passing day. So that was a lot of the reason that we decided to move to Burnaby, to be a little bit closer to work and cut down on the commute. And by that point, we'd built a little bit of equity in our home, and so we're able to move to Burnaby. And that was certainly the way that I sold it to my husband, saying that I wanted to shorten my commute and everything. But the real reason was that our previous strata did not allow pets. And since I had returned from Japan in 2000, I'd been dying to have a cat. So Finally, when we moved to Burnaby in 2018, we got our cats, I think, within about 2 days of moving into our new place. So that made me very happy. And what does home ownership mean to me? I think your home, whether it's something that you own or something that you rent, home is a place to put down your roots. And home is a safe place. And of course, now more than ever with COVID, we all appreciate the safety of our home environment. Home ownership is really a great way, and I mean, we all rely on this, right? It's a great way to build some financial security and savings for your future, and eventually, when you start thinking about retirement, you want to be able to have sort of a bit of a nest egg there. So for us, eventually, we do plan to move out of the Lower Mainland, probably to the Okanagan, and hoping to parlay our apartment here into a small little single detached home in the Okanagan, because that's something that we would never ever be able to afford in Metro Vancouver. What advice would I give my younger self? Probably to enjoy the stage that you're at and don't stress out too much about home ownership. Home ownership is great, and when you get to the stage of your life when it makes sense and when you've got the financial capacity to do it, it's a great thing. However, renting also has some advantages as well, and so I think you should just enjoy the stage that you're at and try not to stress too much about it. My advice to younger folks who are thinking about home ownership, first and foremost, know yourself. Know your tolerance for risk. Try and think about your goals for the future, your plans for your career. What do you want to do in terms of having a family? What is your lifestyle? What brings you joy in your life? I guess basically what's important to you. And also, I think you need to think about what are you willing to sacrifice for home ownership. What I sort of learned through the journey of home ownership was that the time that you spend as a renter, saving your money and getting ready to buy your first home, that'll really prepare you quite well for the financial aspects, at least, of home ownership. So you are going to have to make some sacrifices, right? And I think that all of these sort of personal factors and these questions, if you can ask them to yourself and give yourself some really honest answers, these will give you a good idea of when home ownership will be right for you. And all of these factors will also impact the housing decisions that you make in the long run. Another piece of advice would be to do your homework, obviously. Run the numbers, become financially literate, know about mortgages. There's so many great resources out there that you can look at, particularly online, that will help you understand mortgage financing and what you'll need to do with your financial life in order to make this a reality. And I think it's really important to have a realistic picture of what it's going to take to meet those goals, what your end state is going to look like. And this is sort of the biggest decision that you're going to make in your life, right? So take some time to think about it hard, ask the hard questions, and do your homework. I think it's really important to remember too, when you are at that stage where you do want to buy a home, to really remember that you're starting small, right? You just want to get your foot in the door when the time is right for you, and so that you can take advantage of some of those advantages of home ownership and that feeling of security that it can give you. So buying a home is one of the most important decisions that you'll ever make, and there are a lot of considerations to think about when you're moving into this stage of your life. So some of the things that I really think you have to take into consideration are, first and foremost, I think you really need to think about your financial position, right? Am I financially stable and ready to buy a home? You want to figure out how much you can afford to spend on a monthly basis, and what are you willing to sacrifice to get to that home ownership goal. You'll have to have a good idea of what your down payment will look like, how long it'll take you to save that money, how much is needed, and remember that there are a lot of upfront costs. It's not just that down payment that you have to think about. It's also the inspection fees, the legal costs, all the closing costs. So there are lots of things to take into consideration just on the financial side. You'll also want to take a good look at your budget and really ask yourself, do you have the financial management skills and discipline to manage such a large purchase? Another thing to think about is whether you're really ready for all the costs associated with home ownership. Unlike being a renter, you're sort of responsible for everything, right? You have to be prepared to do repairs and maintenance on your home, and that can be very costly. And talk to anybody who's ever done renovations, it always costs more than you think it's going to cost, right? So another thing to think about is really what is important to you at this point in your life. Is it security? Are you starting a family? Or do you want to be sort of more footloose and fancy-free and have the freedom to move around a bit and work on your career that way, perhaps? Another thing to think about is what are the pros and cons of renting and what are the pros and cons of owning in your particular situation. So whether you're renting or owning, another thing you want to think about, of course, is what is the right location for you? What's important to you in a location? What kind of home do you want or need to have? And this is probably particularly in a market like Metro Vancouver, where you choose to locate is probably going to have a pretty big impact on what kind of home you can afford to buy. At this point, I'd also like to direct you to the CMHC website and let you know about a great resource that we have called the Home Buying Step-by-Step Guide. This is an awesome document, and it really takes you through everything right from the beginning, from starting to think about whether you want to buy a home and whether you're ready to buy a home, right through the whole process. It'll guide you through what you need to think about, all the different steps of looking at a home, choosing a home, financing it, closing the deal, and then how to take care of that investment after you've made your decision and your purchase. And in the beginning, one of the things that's really helpful, I think, from this home ownership guide step by step is to help you decide whether home ownership is right for you at this point. It'll take you through a whole bunch of questions and calculations to see if you're financially ready to buy a home. It helps you understand the basics of mortgage financing. It'll take you through finding the right home for you, how to make an offer and close a deal, and, as I said, how to maintain your home and protect your investment through the future. Another great thing that is in the Home Buying Step-by-Step Guide is there is a workbook, so you can actually work on it yourself, make your own calculations, and it provides some really handy checklists as well and calculators that you can use to help you decide what is the right purchase for you. So as I said, making the home buying decision is one of the hugest decisions you'll ever make in your life, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So I would really suggest that you go to the CMHC website and check out our Home Buying Step-by-Step Guide. And it's really a step-by-step process and gives you all the information that you'll need at every step and help you through it. So it's not going to be quite so daunting for you. So take advantage of all those kinds of resources that are out there, including the CMHC ones. So of course, location is one of the most important things in any home purchasing decision, as well as any renting decision as well. In terms of the investment aspect of housing, I think you really do want to keep in mind what the local housing market has been doing in that area that you're interested in. So I would suggest that for, if you can, a couple years before you are really going to make that decision and make that move to buy a home, that you sort of keep track of the market in that area or several areas that you're interested in. Keeping track of local economic trends and market movements can give you an idea of whether this is a good location for you to buy in or not. I personally tend to think that most locations in the Lower Mainland, you're going to do just fine in terms of a home purchase and that economic aspect, that financial aspect of home ownership. I tend to think that as long as you're in the market for, I don't know, at least maybe 5 years or so, you're probably going to do just fine on your home purchase. But like I said, it is important to have an idea of what the market has been doing in that area of town, how it has been impacted by different economic trends that are happening in the larger economy and housing market, so that you can feel secure in your purchase decision and know that you've made the right one. So there are two broad categories of considerations that you want to look at when you're thinking about buying a home. And of course, these categories, these considerations will change depending on the stage of life that you're at. Are you just starting out in your career and your work life? Are you into the family formation stage of life where you're getting married, having kids? Or are you sort of winding down your career as sort of the general way that it progresses, right? In terms of the work-related factors, these are, of course, changing with COVID and other things going on in the economy. Do you actually still have to be close to work or not? Is it maybe more important for you to have a little bit bigger of a home if you're buying, so that you can have a home office? Maybe you do want to be close to work because you're really focused on your work right now and you really want to grow your career, and so you want to be able to run to the office and anytime you need to and get everything under control. This would also depend on the stage of your career that you're in, and whether you're going to be working at home or whether you're going to be going back to the office, likely, at least part-time. So these are certainly considerations that you want to take into account when you're thinking about buying a home or even renting a home. There are also some really important, at least as important, lifestyle factors that you want to look at. And as I said, a lot of these are dictated by the stage of life that you're in. And this comes down to the sort of schools versus nightclubs argument. So are you a young person who wants to be in the center of the action, close to lots of coffee shops, nightclubs, social activities? Or are you in the stage of your life where you're starting a family and you've got kids and you need to be close to schools? So really take those things into consideration. And another really important point is, what are your interests? What brings you joy? What do you like to do in your spare time? One example of this that I think can make it clear is there is a woman that I work with in my office who's fairly new at CMHC. She's much younger than me, and she and I both sort of moved around the same time. And her decision was to move up from Kitsilano to a new rental apartment in Squamish. And for her ideal weekend is, I talked to her last weekend and on Friday, and I'm like, oh, so what are you doing for the weekend? Oh, well, I'm going for a hike on Saturday. And then on Sunday, I'm doing a 75K run. I'm like, okay. And then she asked me what I was doing this weekend. And I said, well, my weekend usually revolves around trying to find a new restaurant or what we're making for dinner that night, a lot about food and wine. And my idea of being active is walking to the local Italian deli to pick up goodies for our happy hour. So This is all just to say that depending on what your lifestyle is, what you like to do with your spare time, that's going to have a huge impact on what location you choose, and choose carefully, right? So you don't want to be far away from the things that bring you joy. In terms of finding out information on the area, I'm not going to begin to try and advise young people on how to find information on the internet, because they're leaps and bounds ahead of me on all that kind of stuff. But I would also encourage you to spend time in the area that you're thinking about living in. Talk to people who live there. Find out what it's like. What are the pros and the cons of that area? When to buy? This is the huge question, right, in everybody's life. And again, a lot of it depends on very personal factors. But there are also market factors that you will want to take into consideration when you're thinking about buying a home. Home ownership is more than just a financial investment. It's also your home. It's where you live. It's your safe place. It's your haven, right? So you want to take into consideration those market factors, that financial aspect of home ownership, but you also want to take into account the personal factors. One of the things that I've learned, and I did work in housing market analysis for more than 10 years, and one of the things that I learned is you can't time the market. So what I noticed working in housing market analysis at CMHC and looking at the data over and over and over again was that it seemed to me that while the trends in the housing market and the economy can be very long, what I tended to notice when I was crunching the numbers was that if you could be in the market for at least 5 years, that you're probably going to do okay on your home. Even if you happen to hit a market period where prices are not increasing as quickly as you might want them to, you're still building equity, right? Rather than paying somebody else's mortgage as a renter. So I think I would encourage people to remember that home ownership is more than just a financial investment. It's your home, right? You're putting down roots. You're giving yourself a safe place. So I think if you can get into the market and stay there for a while, at least 5 years, I think you're going to do just fine. And trying to time the market is very difficult. And even for somebody like me, who at the point when I was buying a home, I was looking at those housing market numbers day in, day out, 40 hours a week, right? So, and I'm not convinced that timing the market is necessarily the most important thing anyways. Maybe when you're buying your first home, you want to try and hit it pretty well. But after that, when you're into sort of moving up or moving over to a different home, you're going to be selling and buying in sort of the same market. So if the market's gone up, sure, you're going to get more for your home, but you're going to also have to pay more for your next home, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about trying to time the market. I think it's more important to make sure that the time is right for you based on your personal financial situation, as well as what's going on in your life at that moment as well. I think that as long as you're qualified financially to buy a home and in that right financial position and you're not overextending yourself, home ownership can be a wonderful way to set down roots in your community and really build a financial future for yourself and help yourself into the next stage of life as well, into retirement. So I think for young people, it's really important to remember that home ownership is a journey. You're probably going to have to start small and probably pretty modest, particularly in a market like Metro Vancouver. We tend to, watch these home buying shows on TV and, see maybe people in completely different housing markets, young people buying large single detached homes, but that's just not our reality here, right? And for many of us, even, 10, 20, 30 years ago in Metro Vancouver, it wasn't possible to buy a large, beautiful, detached home, right? A lot of us start in a small condo to get our foot in the market. And then once we build a little bit of equity into that and maybe done some renovations, maybe improved it a little bit, then moving up to a slightly larger place. I think that this can give you a real feeling of satisfaction as you start to build equity and improve your home. And I think it's important to realize that you'll get there, but it is a journey. And you might not start in the most beautiful place, but get into the market, choose your location wisely, choose your home type wisely, and enjoy the journey of building your equity, improving your home, and remember that you can't necessarily start at the top, but you will get there eventually.